Hello and welcome to this Bendigo Writers Festival backstory. Now we're doing a bit of a repeat report from last year. We spoke to Annika at the Writers Festival and she was in the middle of a bit of a turmoil. Well, I think we can rightly say that turmoil may have eased a bit. So welcome to Zoom, Annika Smethurst, and thanks for popping in.
Thank you, Steve. It's lovely to be with you from Parliament.
Parliament, there you are in Parliament. So that's something that perhaps we have learned, the difference that these stories can still be done, the Writers' Festivals can still be done with the help of this new technology we've been forced into. So when we last spoke, you were actually pretty new to the situation. You had had a bit of an incident. Now, in your book, which we will talk about later, in the book you start with the raid on your house, which brought you into that world. Well, could you give us the background, and I'm sure you've done this a few times, the background to, in timeline, the story that got you into problems?
Sure. Back in 2018, more than 2 years ago, it was in April, I think, I wrote a story about some plans to expand one of our spy agencies. We have sort of 6 agencies that deal with either foreign threats or local threats, and that includes the AFP and ASIO. They look at naughty Australians, versus the ASD, which is designed to look at, I guess, foreign threats. It's in their motto that we protect Australians from foreign threats. There was a proposal back then to by some department heads at Home Affairs and supported by Defence to expand the role of the ASD so they could actually start to spy on us. Now, anyone in these circles would understand this is a monumental change to the way our national security works. I got wind of this and I wrote about it. And that was more than 2.5 years ago. And it is interesting that they have put the legislation in. They're trying to fight about it just this week.
So that was the story that leaked, and then what happened? Did you get, on the following day after publication? Did you get a bit of a rattle around?
The following day, I was on Insiders actually, and then I went out for breakfast, and life was all going pretty normally. There was a little bit of response to it. A few MPs called me and suggested it was quite a big story, which I knew, and there was. A few MPs were asked about it. They denied it, coalition MPs. They said it would be referred to the AFP, which I kind of thought that might happen. Anytime there's a leak of certain material, information, conversations at a certain height, Cabinet's a great example that if something comes out of Cabinet, it's actually against the law that this sort of stuff comes out. So the AFP tend to investigate. Often it doesn't go very far. They have a bit of a look. They go, oh, this is too hard, or, this is against free press. Peter Dutton just walked past, actually. So, with that in mind, they sort of eventually drop it and move on, and they seem to be doing their job by having a bit of a route around. We do our job by writing what we want to write, and everybody moves on. So, look, it was referred to the AFP, but I didn't sort of think 2 years later I'd still be talking to my lawyers about this, and I am. I spoke to them yesterday. So although we have moved on from then and I have had recent good news, it hasn't gone away from my life, unfortunately.
So you were pretty much in a lull, thinking, oh, that was bad, and you'd forgotten about it over time, because you're just getting on with things. So I was actually in England and I was on the bus, and this is relevant because I was on the bus going along the south coast. I opened my phone to read the news, and your face pops up. I'm thinking, oh, what's Annika doing now? Then I realised, hang on, this is the BBC News. So it was a big story. What happened to put you into the news?
It was. I remember you screenshotting it and sending it to me. And look, some journalists may like the sort of profile I have recently gained. I felt sick about this. I'm a newspaper journalist. I do a bit of TV, but I don't actually... I only like my name in the byline. I never wanted to be the story. I was home on a Tuesday morning in June last year, and I had a knock at the door, and it was the police. They were plain clothed, and I sort of thought, oh, we can just get this over and done with quite quickly. I said, I've got a cleaner coming around in a couple of hours. I've got to get on with my morning, but you guys want to come in? So I invited them in. They had a warrant, but I really didn't think, I thought they were just coming over to chat. I should have thought when there was 5 of them and then 2 more backups that it was going to be more than this. It wasn't just two people doing a check, but I'd never had any interaction with the police. So I invited them in and sat them down, and they told me they were going to search my property and wanted my phone and all this sort of thing. So I realised by this stage I was in a bit of strife. And I rang my editor, who got a lawyer to my house, a couple of lawyers quite quickly. But there was nothing I could do. And I think one of the worst things about it was relinquishing control. I started to follow them around and sort of justify things in my house, like, oh, well, just ignore that. That's a notebook from my year 12 history or something like this, which it was. I wasn't trying to like pervert justice, but it was just, I felt so uncomfortable, I guess, with what was going on that I for some reason had this sort of reaction. And then I was trying to downplay it. I genuinely thought maybe this will be over in a few hours, I can get back to work and I'll just mention to a few people, you'll never guess what happened this morning. But it was when I was an exchange student in France in year 10, and my French host mother texted me to say she'd heard it on the news in France. Another friend in England, her mother had called hysterical, being, is Annika okay? And I started to realise, a friend in America had the same response, and I realised that not only was this going to make the news in Australia, this was going to be a global issue, and there was no way of containing it. And I wanted to put a lid on it, and it blew up.
That was. How did you react to that? Because I can't imagine. You said you don't want to be the poster girl, perhaps the term we can use. You didn't want to be that. But how did you react if you weren't expecting that? How did you deal with it?
Very badly. I think I thought I'd act a little bit better than I did. I just wanted to crawl under a doona and cry. I stopped watching the news most nights because I didn't want to see pictures of my house. I stopped reading the newspapers. I had to stop watching comedy shows like Sean McAuliffe because I was mentioned on it. I was unable to laugh it off for a long time because there was the threat of jail, and I knew it was a public story, but I was hysterical, and I was also hysterical for the worry my family was having. They were very upset and concerned, rightly so. I tried for a while to just come back into Parliament House. I have an office here and do work, and just like, well, this week I'm going to write about, an ombudsman's report or an AG's report or something terribly bland. And I think I thought if I just kept going about my work, this would all go away. But it just didn't. It didn't. In fact, it got worse and worse and worse. And it happened in June. And I think in about October, I just had this realization that this has happened and you have to accept it, and you got to turn it into a positive. And that if, I can, help with some change or help with promoting this as an issue, and if for some reason, my case has touched people and made them aware of this issue, then I guess I need to embrace it. And from that moment on, I did start to do more interviews and talk about it and try and talk about the issue. But before then, I just wanted to put my head in the sand and just make it all go away.
That's understandable. We spoke, it must have been at the Writers' Festival last year, which for the life of me, I can't remember the date, but it was August. So that was pretty new to you then. And you mentioned that you didn't go back to your house after the event. Now, I probably wanted to say, you say your apartment. What sort of size apartment are we talking about to have these police in?
Look, bigger than the sort of apartments that get built now, because it's like Canberra, it's very 1970s. But 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, modest apartment. And yet it took 7, sorry, those bells are because there's a division in Parliament, in the Senate by the looks of it. A place that you wouldn't think was that big, that would take 7 hours and 7 policemen that long to go through. But if someone said to you, lay out everything you've got, it's not just like moving house, which you can usually do in one day. Lay out all the books in your house, like I can see the ones behind you, Steve, and we're going to go through them page by page, which is what happened. They took out every notebook I've got in my house and went through them page by page. I can't even read my own handwriting. It's somewhere between a shorthand and a regular, writing. And yet they just went through everything, my bin, the contents of my bin from June when I'd written the story a year before. They poured everything out of it, like rubbish bin, scraps, and they went through my freezer. And so this is more than just a, I guess, a moving house, packing everything up in a box. They took pictures off the wall, undid the back of them. Like, it was quite incredible.
And they've obviously done that before. I think how does that go? I mean, your clothing drawer is oft mentioned, but what about personal notes? And how does that feel? Is that something which affected you, do you think?
The underwear drawer was made an issue, and I get why. I'm a newspaper person, and I understand what sells stories, and I get that bit for a young woman living alone is sort of, but like, what were they? I wear underwear, like everyone knows that. I don't think it's a big deal. It was the things that worried me were cards. People had sent me letters, love letters, friends letters, like cards my grandparents had sent me. They were letters that were between me and the person who had sent them, and I realised how much they lost significance and other people had spied on them. And I didn't have anything against the police in my house. I didn't feel that they were just doing their job. I don't believe they, in many cases they wanted to be sent there that day, and they probably felt terribly uncomfortable too. But just by them being there and snooping through my life, it was awful. And especially a telephone. I've had an iPhone for 10 years. I have text messages from you, from a lot of people who, when they sent them, assumed it was just my eyes that would see them, and vice versa. And, it doesn't matter if they are of a personal nature or of a bitchy nature or of just sharing.
Surely not. Surely.
Never us, Steve. Or just sharing some good news that that person wants to do. That they told me something for a reason, and I just felt like that trust had just disappeared.
Well, I would imagine that in the job you're in, you'd have some pretty high-level text as well as some pretty mundane stuff. So, and it's all out there now, presumably. Is it on a computer somewhere?
Well, this is what worried me. Like, I know some people seem to. I think as journalists, we do a very bad job of explaining to people how we do our job, and people think there's conspiracy theories that, God forbid, I would text MPs, but I hate to tell you, I do. I've had dinner with them. I know these people. That's how we get stories. That's how we get the information to tell the reader. I would have in my phone, I would confidently say there's 226 MPs in this building, maybe 220 of their numbers. There's a few new ones I don't know. I've been in contact with most of them at some point, whether that be, over a story or an issue or a policy or a leadership spill, or I've either reached out to them or they've reached out to me because they've got a good story. This is how it works. Now, as you say, a lot of it's mundane. Some of it's not. Some of it's juicy gossip. That also extends to people in my personal life, my friends and colleagues, and they took an entire swipe of my phone. So 10 years worth of text messages, put it on a hard drive and took it. Look, they did whittle down, I guess, texts they said they were going to use in any prosecution. They used a timestamp period around when I wrote the story. They did a keyword search, but they still did take all this information, and they provided me with a stat deck eventually saying it would be destroyed, but I don't know who looked at it when I was in there. We do hear a lot of cases of only recently police illegally accessing information, and I hope that they haven't. And I've had some very good dealings with some police, and I found a lot of them to be very respectful and wonderful people, and I just hope that standards were maintained in the case of my information.
Well, yeah, I wonder is that something that if it hadn't been destroyed, someone can access through freedom of information, or does it go a different level to that?
I don't think so. I think it was more if it were leaked. Being someone that relies on leaks, I understand that this information does come out. It is against the law. So it kind of is an ironic situation, isn't it, that if my information was leaked, I guess my argument is it's not in the national interest, my text messages to you, Steve Kendall, versus changes to national security law. So.
Okay, so that was so in that period, shortly after you said you'd come around to about October of last year, which isn't that long ago, really, and all of this time you're wondering what's going to happen, presumably. Did you have any indication how it was going to go? How it was going to go?
Until a few weeks ago, really, I was still wondering, and everybody would say to me, "Oh, you'll be right. They're not going to put a journalist in jail." I remember a senior Labor figure, I won't say who, coming up to me and saying, "If this happens, we will protest. We'll shut down Parliament." Yeah, sure you will, and then life will go back to normal. It was a nice idea that I wouldn't go to jail, but people had always said they're not going to raid your house. They're not going to threaten this, and that happened. So I had no faith in the fact that this wouldn't leave me. And it wasn't just a concern for me, it was concern for people that speak to me, whether they found the correct whistleblower or whistleblowers or not, or whether they, what if they got the wrong person? What if they started prosecuting the wrong person and ruined their life, their livelihood, or put somebody in jail? I was so fearful, and I thought, I can't live with that. Even if I get let off, if people who have trusted me to talk to me, whether for the story or not, get caught up in this, I don't think I'll ever forgive myself.
Do you think, and I probably know the answer to this, do you think people approached you less due to that event?
Yes, definitely. And whilst my profile may have risen, my ability to do my job didn't. They're sort of counterproductive, those two things, especially newspaper journalism. But in this building, there's hundreds and hundreds of journalists working in the same building as politicians. We stand in the coffee line with them. We, have lunch in the same courtyards. And, that you build trust, and through doing stories with them and, writing columns and getting the accurate information across, and people start to go, I like what she does, or I like what he does. And I had spent a lot of time working really hard to get that sort of reputation. And I felt that as soon as this happened, my phone did stop ringing, and people didn't want to be seen having a coffee with me because, what if, they were to be identified.
Now, you're probably not in a position to say this, but as someone who's observing, I've got no one to wave at. As someone who's observing, you broke some pretty high-profile stories that actually impacted on some politicians' lives. Do you think in any way that the Bronwyn Bishop and Susan Ley affairs were instrumental in bringing about some sort of retribution? I know that's hard for you to actually claim that.
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't think that, mainly because when I wrote about a lot of those people, some people in their own party was just as happy to see them. I think in Punterland or in Reader World, we have this idea that it's all of Labor versus all of Liberal, and it's not. Often people are just as competitive with people on their own side, and people also have, certain standards that if your own side lets you down, it's a bigger issue than if the other side do. So, no, I don't think because I've written two stories that led to Liberal downfalls that then therefore they came after me. This was a national security issue, they claimed. Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister when I wrote it, and they referred it to the AFP. But Mark Dreyfus, who was Labor's Shadow Attorney General and still is, also wrote to the Prime Minister and said, you need to refer this. So this wasn't, Labor did come to my support during this, but at the time they actually suggested that the AFP investigate this link.
So at the same time, on another matter, the following day you were the first raid, but then the ABC had something similar, except they got warning, as I understand.
Yeah.
Why the different approach, do you think?
A lot of people have said this. Look, they got warning because they had to get passes to go into the ABC, the police. Oh. Now, they came to my personal home. They didn't come to my office. And a lot has been made about that, about why they wouldn't have come to my office. My office is in Parliament House. So that adds an extra layer of complexity. You would have had to get a pass to come here. But more importantly, they would have had to, we believe, alert the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Reps and the President of the Senate. And in many ways, that would have seen them granting some sort of, even if, they couldn't stop the raid, but if they had have known, it would have been seen as some sort of, approval. It would have put the government in a difficult position. So they came to my personal home. They never raided my office. My office is here in Parliament House. As you say, the next day they did go to the ABC. They got warning. In fact, they negotiated the day. On the third day, there's been reports they were meant to go to News Corp in Sydney, where my bosses work. That is true. They were meant to go there. Now, they cancelled that for whatever reason, whether through political pressure. There's also thought that perhaps because we'd already raised issue with the warrant at my house, that they didn't want to risk doing a second raid with a warrant that perhaps wasn't up to scratch, which I think that there might be some merit in that. Or maybe it was just, after 3 days, it was like, this is what sort of country are we living in where we raid media organisations 3 days in a row. But they didn't end up going through with that.
So I think the thing that people would most relate to is that you're a hard-nosed journo, you do all this thing, you should expect some comeback. But I think it was a bit extreme, just on a personal level. But I think the biggest thing that showed me the impact it had on you is, I understand you left your apartment. You didn't go there again. So
Yeah.
tell me the mental process involved in that decision.
Yeah, and I've recently left my job too, so it's changed my life.
Yes.
Look, as I say, personally, having 7 people root around my things was pretty confronting. Outside my house that day, there was also a bunch of media, and I understand that. I've been a journo for a long time. I've sat on stakeouts outside people's properties when they've done wrong or there's something of interest going on there. So I don't have now there's a second bell, I don't have any reason to feel anger towards that. But one of the photographers said to me, someone drove past that day and said, oh, so that's where Annika Smethurst lives. And I thought, okay, well, that makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. I went to Vietnam on a holiday a few weeks later, and I was sitting then I went home via Singapore, and I was sitting in a pub, and pictures of my house flashed up on the television. And I just thought, that everyone in the world now knows where I live. Canberra's a very small place. I was living there alone as a woman I was 30 at the time, I think, and I just thought, I can't stay here. I also wasn't convinced there hadn't been some sort of listening device put in my house. That might be a conspiracy theory. I have no evidence to back that up, but I assume, and my phone was bugged during this time, I was told to assume that. We do know they did ask for some journalist warrants to monitor the phone calls of journos that year, and I guess put 2 and 2 together, it probably was me. So I just didn't feel safe having conversations in that house and staying in that house again.
You mentioned earlier about how all the journalists are together in Canberra. Do you think that creates a bit of a cosy atmosphere where there is a bit too much relaxation between politicians and the journalists? Because you're very much in the same building, as you say. You mingle at lunch, and it's good for interaction. Is it good for balancing stories? Do you think?
I think it makes us get more stories because you can't avoid these people. You run into them at Coles, you run into them in the car park. So it actually assists us. I understand the criticism people say about the coziness. I think any good journo can separate themselves. It's weird with politics that people go, because I think some people in the general public really identify with certain parties, whether they're conservative or progressive on the left or the right. And I would say most people who work in this building see it differently, maybe because we're up close to them all the time. We realise how similar the structures are on both sides, and how there's good and bad on both sides, and it actually doesn't discriminate what sort of party you're a member of. So I think I can see that people have that view, but I sort of look at it as football teams. Like, I'm a Collingwood supporter. I could actively report because I'm a professional on that job, and as a sports reporter, and not take that into consideration. I think doctors who have strong moral views or should still be able to do their job, and I think there is a difference between columnists, and there's not a lot of columnists in this building, but in terms of reporting, you should be able to still see a good story when you see it, and not, I guess, give favourable treatment because a politician lives across the road. That's true. A local, Damien Drum lives across the road from me. Well, used to in my old apartment, which is rated. Just because I see him at the shops, it doesn't change my, ability to see a good story if one were to come across my desk involving him.
So people, I read in your book, which we will come to, about the popularity among the general public of journalists, and journalists sort of fit somewhere in the middle about whether they're trusted or not. Do you think you found a leaning towards sympathy for you despite the job? Do you think people tend to think, oh, they just toe the party line? But did you find a change in attitude towards you after the raid?
I found a lot of support, which, I think usually if you work for, it depends what side of, I work for News Corp, from certain, more left communities, I usually get a lot of criticism, just the same as people at the ABC, who there's a perception that they sit to the left, get a lot of criticism from the right. This is how it works. But I found I actually didn't get much, and as much as people don't like journalists, and usually we tend to be down the bottom of trust value ratings and things like this, I think people still drew the line at what happened to me. There was a lot of, well, I don't usually like journalists, or I don't usually like this, but, sending 7 police to your house, the AFP, who are meant to go after, pedophiles and terrorists, I think people thought that was wrong. Whether or not they liked me or the company I work for or the writing I do or whatever, they could see that this wasn't a country they want to live in that goes after journalists, I think. And that might sit counter to the current narrative that people dislike journalists. And I think there is a growing distrust of journalists. And I think it's terrifying that we allow politicians, both on the left and the right, you see it, Trump will stand up there and say, these people are wrong, believe me. And then people turn on the journalists. And we're seeing it in Australia, even with some, if you dare mention at the moment that Daniel Andrews' government may have made a few little errors or oversights down in Victoria, the level of vitriol and attacks, personal attacks you get is quite incredible, because people, I think, are increasingly acting like cheer squads for different sides of their parties, and, criticising and, I guess, pointing out errors and ministerial responsibility on both sides doesn't, you can do that, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can still support a side and see criticism from them, but increasingly we're not seeing that. So I think there is a real growing distrust and hatred towards journalists. I feel it every day in the messages I get, but through all of that, I do feel that there was still a level of support for me that went, we might not like you guys, but this is too far.
That's too far. You say about that the access that the general public, I use that term broadly, anybody can have to you through social media. Is that an element of intrusion too? Do you have to separate the work Twitter from the home Twitter, or do you just keep away from it sometimes just to escape it?
Increasingly so, and I do find my mental health is worse than that of my colleagues on days when we spend too much time on it. I think I understand that they've allowed a lot of different voices, these platforms, which is good, and a lot of conversations, but I think there is this blurring of news versus opinion. I think you can't have a proper argument in 140 characters, say, on Twitter. I think, everybody thinks they're entitled to their opinion, which they are, but that doesn't make it fact, and I think there's a lot of blurring of that. There is now a million different ways for people to abuse you, whether that's, it used to just be my telephone, which I just wouldn't answer, which has a million messages on it because I thought I don't need abusive messages. Now it's my inbox, it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's every way under the sun. And I believe we're allowed to have, I guess, constructive criticism, but the abuse and cheering for both sides of politics, and if you dare, I've written negative things about both sides. I've written stories that have...
With good cause.
that ended the careers of people on both sides or severely, stumped them. And yet, people were just so protective of their own, which I find a very interesting thing in politics that, I think I've always found the power lies in the middle, and swinging voters have the power. No side has the monopoly on good or bad or, expenses, scandals. It seems to infect both sides of politics. And I think if the more critical you are, and if you sit in the middle and you can see fault on both sides, you're a more empowered voter.
So you mentioned that you were giving up the role. So you've been in journalism 10 years or so, 11 years maybe. Sorry, I'm just guessing. And
Yeah.
do you think this has hurried up your break?
It's hurried up my break from 100%. Like I lost a love and a zest for this job through what I've been through now. You know, I'm not quitting permanently. I'm taking a break. I'm still doing insiders and other media. But in terms of the daily grind of newspaper journalism, press gallery journalism, which is what I've done for most of my career, it is an intense place to be. It's an intense place to be when you're the focus of the story, when you're trying to get stories, but also at the same time you're being written about. And it just, it prompted me to go, I need to take a break to find my zest for it. And I'm going to write a book while I'm off, not on Press Freedom. I can't say what that's about, but hopefully we can talk about it in a forum like this next year when it comes out, Steve. But it just made me realise I need to step back and find what makes me interested and excited now. I used to get a wind of a story and just want to pursue it, to the point of not sleeping or coming in on weekends or, just going above and beyond to really get that story. And I guess, you do it because you think you're going to make a difference. And, it's my way. Everybody contributes in a different way. I don't have the skills to be a doctor. So my skills are to, I thought, hold the government to account, but I put a lot on the line to do that previously, and those laws that I wrote about are about to go, are being debated now. So it's frustrating that you don't always get the change that you want, that I wrote about this and that I paid such a heavy price for it. So I just think now is the right time to step back for a few months and work on a different political project, and hopefully I find that zest and passion and can come back in.
Now, I'm going to bring about this book. You're going to tell us about this, because I was expecting something, I suppose, a little bit bigger, just a little bit bigger. So what is the idea behind these Hachette books on the On series? Yours is called On Secrets, which is understandable, but there's a whole series of them.
I wish I knew how many they're in the front. You can probably look in the front and see some of the other ones that have been written. They're meant to be bite-sized. Having said that, it was, I think, 14,000 words I wrote whilst working a bunch of other jobs, so it didn't feel that bite-sized writing it. But they've all got, I get different issues about what people have written. Stan Grant has written one, I think his is called On Race, perhaps. I guess they could talk about prominent. I wouldn't say that because I'm not prominent and I've written it, but people in Australia who have got different, whether through choice or circumstance like me, have been through different experiences, writing, 14,000 words on their experience. They're part essay, part not. My favourite one was probably Lee Sales wrote one called On Doubt, which actually talks about what I was talking about, that people that are so committed to one side of politics or one ideology that they don't have any doubt. And she was saying, as a journalist, she has doubt. Her, thoughts and opinions change, and that she finds it strange that some people don't have any doubt, and how you could be so confident, including politicians. They're confident enough to join one side. So I found her little essay really interesting. They're a bit cheaper too. They're like $16. So they're often sold at airports, and they're just a cute little read. So that was my first foray into book writing. My next book is meant to be 80,000 words. So we'll see how I go writing 4 times as many words in the next project.
Well, it's one of those books, and I honestly did. I read it in one sitting, and I thought it's a long time since I've actually sat down and read a story. So it's a good length, actually. You're right. It's you think, oh, that's small, but it's a good length. It's like a very good piece of long form, like you might see in the New Yorker or something. So it's a very readable book, and of course I'm sort of interested in it anyway for the background of journalism. So when you've been through all this and you're sort of stepping away for a while, do you think it's going to affect what you went through? Will it affect the way people look at journalism, or will people want to be journalists still, the way the newspapers are changing?
I think so. Look, people always ask me about, will my story, what happened to me, prevent people from writing stories in the future? Most journos I know from all organisations still love a good yarn and will write it. I think the fear is they might take fewer risks. They'll still write them, but with fewer risks. And I think the problem is, should you do that? For an example, one of the issues in my story was what appeared to be, whether some sort of documentation that was attributed in the article or, quoted. And if you come across something like that, another example is if you come across a cabinet leak and you actually have pages of documents, do you publish them at the risk of getting in trouble, or do you refer to them? Now, if you refer to them, you'll have people say, well, how do we know? There's a lot of people squawking now about how do we know that's real? How do we know this? So in order to stand up a story, you often have to get more information, and the more information you get told, the more risk you could put yourself at. So I think then people might be a little bit more risk averse, but I'm more worried about whistleblowers. I think journalists would still take risks. I don't know how many people who work in banks or hospitals or national security will see an issue and speak up, and they will walk past it. And we've all probably got examples of that happening, because it's easier sometimes not to, speak up and get in trouble and risk losing your own job. Very brave people are whistleblowers, and we need them, not just because journos rely on them, but we need them to get change. That's how we get banking royal commissions and all these things that actually end up changing society. And I fear that what happened to me and the ABC will see fewer people want to speak up, and that's a real worry, I think.
Do you think that was the idea behind it, ultimately?
Yeah, I do. A lot of people said to me throughout it, they're not after you, they're after the people that speak to you. I didn't find that any great comfort. I wasn't like, oh, okay, that's fine, I'll just go on with my life. To me, that was just as bad, if not worse. I think people that do speak up are very brave. I don't always. We've all seen different things at places we've worked, or, even just any interactions we've had, and not everybody chooses to speak up. It's a hard thing to do. And in many other countries, whistleblowers are rewarded financially, rewarded in other ways. And we actually have this culture where we think they're dobbers and squealers, and good people just get on with work and shut up. That we've got a real culture of that. And I think that's now flowing through, and I think it'll stop people alerting us to major structural issues in our institutions and organisations.
That was the first thing. I'm from the UK, as you may have guessed, and that's something I really noticed the difference about Australia. It really, there is that dobber. It's a really bad thing.
You guys love whinging. We have this thing against dobbers. We don't like people that like to rock the boat. It's very strange.
Yeah, and it's changed the way that newspapers... What do you see the future for newspapers then? Is it going to work on an online platform with things like Facebook are talking about limiting Australian newspapers going online?
I think it's quite it's a new thing they've decided to do, this retaliation from Facebook. I actually think it could backfire on them. If people know there's no actual news on Facebook, then at least we'll all take it with a grain of salt. I think the problem is now people read articles on Facebook and take it as truth, and it's actually fake news. If they commit to removing proper newspapers, at least, it'll have no credibility. I do fear for newspapers. I don't think they'll ever be dead. I think the more fake news there is out there, the more people crave actual news organisations. It doesn't matter which one it is. What I define as a real news organisation is ones with editors and reporters and legal teams, and ones that go through every day and go, should we put this on the front? What are the risks? What are the rewards? Is this in the public's right to know? Those are real newspapers. Blogging has its place, social media has its place, but they're not news. And I think the more complicated and complex that world gets, people will actually go back and crave news. I do worry about the business model of paying for it, since people have been able to get it free for so long. As somebody in their 30s, I know not a lot of my friends buy the daily newspaper anymore. They don't always read it online too. And I think we're a poorer society for it.
Annika, I think I'll wrap it up there. I think we've heard lots from you. I think you've done very well, and I gather from this this short conversation with you that one thing you won't be missing is division bells.
I'm sorry about that. Hear them? That one's the House of Reps one. They ring all day.
So if you could just, as a final point, tell us what the division bells mean.
In Parliament House, the bells ring. They're a slightly different pitch, and it's when there's a vote in the House of Reps or the Senate. And during a sitting week, and they flash green or red on all the clocks in the building to tell you which house it's in. Sometimes they both ring at once. And at the end of a sitting week, sometimes you wake up hearing the division bells because they've been in your head so long. And I know one Liberal MP got so angry, they, a few parliaments ago, smashed the clock in their office to try and prevent the bells from ringing.
Well, hopefully in your break, as we're going to put it, because we know we'll see you back somewhere, enjoy a time without bells. And thanks very much for speaking to us today.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.